So in my last video, I showed you how to do the floret wrapped woven picot stitch, and I can link that video in the description. But I talked about the 3 different types of thread that you can use for this stitch, the different ways to embellish it with beads and sequins, and then we did a little sample stitch. Today I'm going to show you how to do the twisted, I call this the twisted woven picot. And it's a great stitch to add either detail throughout your piece or something like a leaf shape if you're working on a more like abstract or free form type embroidery. This is a really fun stitch to add throughout your work. So I am using the Eleganza Pearl Cotton. This is one of the Suspargo colors, and this is the size 5. I also really like using variegated threads for this type of stitch because you can see when you use a variegated thread, you get a lot of color without a ton of effort. You'd get the same thing if you were using like a solid thread, but it just feels like there's more going on. So I just love using variegated threads. So this is what I'm going to use, and I'm cutting a nice long length of the thread, longer than I normally would for embroidery, just because I don't want to thread and unthread my needle as I work this stitch. So I'm going to add like a long leaf shape to this floret wrapped stitch that I did in the last video, and I'm using the doll needle as well. So this is just a very long doll needle, and we're going to do it a lot like the floret wrapped one. So I'm going to be starting, let's see, I'm going to just put my needle in, and I'm working up to the flower because I want it to seem as if it is attached to this flower. And I'm actually just going to put my needle a little bit through the flower because I want my base of the stitch to come right up to the flower. So the way that this stitch works, wherever the tip of your needle ends up, that's where your stitch is going to be secured to the fabric. So because I want it touching this flower, I'm going to have to work it right up next to that raised stitch. So my floret or my twisted woven picot is going to be about this long. So your stitch will be as long as however much needle is behind your fabric. So because I could go much longer with this, but for the sake of the video, I'm just going to keep it about this long, and that seems like the right sort of length to have on a flower this size. So I'm also using a tapestry needle because a lot of this will be woven, and so I'm going to bring my thread and my tapestry needle up to the left of that needle. I'm not going through the flower, but I'm bringing it like right next to, you can see it's very close to where the flower is. And then I'm taking it behind the needle, just like that. And then I'm taking it back down through the fabric, and I'm making like an upside down V shape. Okay. And now I'm going to bring my needle up one more time, and this time it's going to be much closer to the needle. So as my tapestry needle is coming through the fabric, it's kind of touching the doll needle, and I'm pulling it all the way through again. And then I'm also going to take this behind the needle. So I have 3 strands here. At this point, I like to flip it around because I'm going to work from the top down. And I am going to take my needle, and I'm going to go under the outside stitch, over the middle stitch, and under the other outside stitch. And as I pull it through, I just use my needle to kind of bring the thread towards the top. And now I'm going to do the exact opposite. So I'm taking my needle under, or I'm sorry, over, under, and over. So every time that you take your needle back and forth, you're just doing the opposite of what you already did in the previous stitch. And so that's how it is a woven stitch. And then I can take my needle under, over, under. And before I pull it all the way through, I just take that opportunity to push my thread towards the top of this stitch. You want to keep a nice tension with your thread. You don't want it super loose, and you don't really want gaps to be seen. So you can see, I'll bring it a little closer to the camera. I'm just pushing the threads nice and tight up to the previous thread as I take it through. So I'm just doing the opposite. I'm working with my right and left hand because that's how I work this stitch. So you can see if I just left it that way, there'd be a small gap of fabric there. So as I take my next stitch under, I just push that to the top. So I'm going to keep going with this all the way down to the end right here. Just doing the same exact thing. Okay, so you can see I still have a tiny bit to go, but I have kind of run out of my thread. Because I'm so close to the base of this, I am just going to take my thread down through the fabric. And then I like to run this thread just under a few of my stitches. I really cut it close with this one, so I think I'm only going to be able to do it about that far. And then I'm going to cut a new length of thread and continue where I was. So I'm just going to rethread that needle and pick up my last few stitches. Now sometimes when you get way down to the end like this, the needle, it's a little tricky. I'm going to turn it this way now. It's a little tricky with the needle. Let me pick it back up where I was. The needle doesn't want to cooperate, the doll needle that's already in there. So at this point, I feel comfortable taking the needle out because I know I have the majority of my stitches done and finishing up that way. So I've got my 3 stitches in here, and I'm still going to just continue weaving it until I get all the way to the base of this stitch or to the flower. I think I can fit another stitch in there. Okay, and then I like to take my needle and I cover the outside stitches. So I'll take it down through the fabric, covering over that stitch along this side, and then I do the same thing and I cover up the stitch, just a little like foundation stitch on the left hand side, and that's just securing it, really securing it to the base of your fabric. So now you can see the whole stitch is not attached to the fabric, only the bottom base part that I wanted to be attached is. And it automatically starts to twist. When you get such a long length of thread like this, it does want to just twist, but you can also see how cool the variegation looks with this thread. So now I switch needles and I leave my thread exactly where it is. So I'm just going to pick a thinner needle, probably not that thin, just a regular non-tapestry needle, and rethread it. And now I'm going to look at this piece. Now, when I'm doing a piece like this, I will stitch all of these first before attaching them to the fabric, because I want to see what it looks like, where I want the twists to end up. But then when I finally decide that, that's when I can like maneuver this around. And oh, this is a cool one. So I just kind of play with the stitches to see how do I want them to twist. I might be adding beads throughout this. I might have it going over and under different things. So when I do decide on how I want it to be twisted and placed, I'm going to bring my needle up along the stitch, and I am just going to secure it to the fabric in a few places. I always start near the base and then work up to the top with a few stitches. Just like that. And you can see once you get a few stitches there, it's not going to move. And then if I'm doing other things, that might be the only 2 stitches or 2 areas where I'm going to add my stitches until it's completely finished. And then I can decide, do I want this to attach closer to the fabric? I can do that. You can see that it can be maneuvered around to a point once you've secured it at both ends. You could do another stitch and have it like go under there and twist around this way. So yeah, there's a lot of variety that you can do. I could add like a whole bunch of them going all the way around and create like a really cool looking flower with long leaves. So that's the Twisted Picot Stitch, Woven Picot Stitch, and you can see how it looks here when it's twisted with beads. So I hope you enjoyed that stitch. Happy stitching!